Russell Crowe, once the unstoppable force of Hollywood, a man whose presence lit up every screen he graced, whose performance in Gladiator in 2000 earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor in 2001, vanished seemingly overnight. Fans, critics, and colleagues alike were left asking the same question: what happened to the man who had conquered cinema, whose name was synonymous with power, passion, and raw intensity? In the early 2000s, Crowe was everywhere. He was celebrated for films like A Beautiful Mind in 2001 and Master and Commander. The Far Side of the World in 2003, praised for his dedication, intensity, and unforgettable performances. Yet behind the glittering accolades and roaring applause, the pressures of fame, the relentless scrutiny and personal battles were quietly reshaping his life. The man who once stormed onto screens with unstoppable energy was slowly stepping away, leaving a trail of questions in his wake. What caused Russell Crowe to retreat from the spotlight at the height of his career? Was it the weight of Hollywood's expectations, turbulent personal moments, or a deliberate choice to reclaim a private life? Today we finally uncover the truth behind the disappearance of one of the greatest actors of his generation, the man who captivated the world and then vanished into silence. The tension in Russell Crowe's life was never just on screen. In the years following his triumphs with Gladiator in 2000 and A Beautiful Mind in 2001, the glare of fame intensified. Every public appearance, every interview, every red carpet became a delicate balancing act. The media scrutinized his every move, from his performances to his personal relationships. And Crowe, whose intensity was legendary, often found himself at odds with the attention he had once craved. By the mid-2000s, the man who had once embraced the spotlight now faced its unrelenting weight, a weight that few could truly comprehend. Crowe's personal life added to the strain. His marriage to Danielle Spencer, which began in 2003, brought joy and stability, yet the demands of Hollywood constantly pulled him in opposing directions. Time spent filming in distant locations, including New Zealand and Los Angeles, meant long periods away from family. The pressure to maintain his career while protecting his private life created a quiet storm. Crowe was no stranger to confrontation. High-profile incidents, like the hotel altercation in New York in 2005, became tabloid fodder, painting him as volatile in ways that overshadowed his artistic achievements. The tension extended to his career choices as well. Crowe had built a reputation for demanding authenticity, immersing himself fully in roles, whether in Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World in 2003, or Cinderella Man in 2005. Yet the very dedication that won him acclaim also left little room for compromise. Films that once defined his career now seemed to bring an additional burden, a constant reminder of the expectations that surrounded him. The industry watched closely, critics debated his decisions, and audiences waited for the next triumph, all while Crowe navigated the increasing complexity of balancing personal and professional demands. By the early 2000s, the tension was compounded by the shifting landscape of Hollywood itself. Studios were changing, franchises dominated the box office, and the intensity that had fueled Crowe's rise now became a source of friction. Roles that once challenged and excited him now came with relentless publicity campaigns and invasive media coverage. Crowe, who had always valued authenticity and depth over spectacle, began to retreat inward, seeking projects that aligned with his artistic vision rather than the expectations of an industry in constant flux. Even the very act of retreating carried tension. Stepping away from a career that had given him so much was not simple. Every absence raised questions. Fans speculated, colleagues wondered, and the media filled the void with conjecture. Behind closed doors, Crowe made deliberate choices, prioritizing his family, his well-being, and his sense of purpose over the demands of public attention. The tension of this period was both external and internal, a dual struggle between a man revered by millions and a private individual who longed for quiet and control. This tension, relentless and ever-present, laid the foundation for the next chapter in Crowe's story. It was not scandal, nor failure, that defined his withdrawal, but the human cost of sustained exposure, and the courage it took to step back from the world that adored him. The decisions he made in these years would shape the rest of his life, guiding him toward reflection, and eventually toward a form of redemption that few could have anticipated. As the years passed, the glow of Hollywood began to dim around Russell Crowe, not because his talent faded, but because life demanded stillness. The same fire that had carried him to the heights of cinema now softened into something quieter, more introspective. Fame, once thrilling, had become a burden. By the early 2010s, Crowe was no longer chasing the roles that once defined him. Instead, he sought distance. The man who had commanded battlefields in Gladiator and minds in A Beautiful Mind began to turn his gaze inward. In 2012, his marriage to Danielle Spencer ended in divorce, marking the close of a chapter that had once grounded him. The split was not accompanied by public spectacle, but by silence, a silence that reflected both pain and acceptance. Crowe devoted much of his time to his children, balancing work with fatherhood, often seen far from Hollywood's lights on his farm in New South Wales. The stillness of that life contrasted sharply with the roaring applause of earlier years, yet it offered something he had long been missing: peace. Films such as Noah in 2014 and The Nice Guys in 2016 showcased glimpses of the intensity audiences remembered, yet they arrived without the same global frenzy that once surrounded his work. Each project seemed chosen, not for fame, but for meaning. In interviews, Crowe spoke less about ambition and more about authenticity, about the importance of storytelling over stardom. The sorrow he carried was not born from loss, but from growth, a calm realization that even the brightest success leaves traces of its cost. There were losses that deepened this introspection. The deaths of industry peers and longtime collaborators served as reminders of time's passage and the fragility of connection in a world that often prizes fame over friendship. Crowe mourned privately, retreating further from the noise, allowing grief to reshape his understanding of purpose. The audiences who once saw him as indestructible began to glimpse a man who, beneath the roles, carried vulnerability and fatigue. Financial strains also emerged. Investments and personal commitments weighed heavily, yet rather than returning to Hollywood's relentless pace, Crowe managed his challenges with resolve. In 2018, he famously auctioned memorabilia from his career, calling the event The Art of Divorce. The auction was not merely financial, it was symbolic, a public farewell to the trappings of his past, and a quiet reclaiming of his identity. As the spotlight moved on to new stars, Crowe seemed content to remain in the background. He made fewer public appearances, granting occasional interviews marked by reflection rather than performance. His face, once a constant on magazine covers, appeared less frequently, replaced by images of him performing music, spending time on his ranch, or supporting Australian charities. The man who had once embodied cinematic heroism now embodied humanity, flawed, reflective, and at peace with impermanence. The sadness in Russell Crowe's story was never one of downfall but of distance. He had given so much to the art that defined him that stepping away was not loss but necessity. The world had watched him conquer and withdraw, unaware that behind the quiet exterior lay the same passion, redirected toward a life that valued meaning over magnitude. In time, Russell Crowe began to find a sense of balance between who he had been and who he wanted to become. Away from the clamor of studios and premieres, he started to rediscover what had drawn him to storytelling in the first place. The reflection that followed was not shaped by regret, but by understanding. Crowe had given decades to his craft, and though his name had once dominated every headline, he now valued the quiet moments more than the applause. Fame had given him recognition, but solitude gave him perspective. During these years, he returned to his early passion for music. Long before Gladiator and A Beautiful Mind, He had performed with his band, and music once again became a refuge. Performing in small venues across Australia, he found comfort in simplicity. There were no scripts, no retakes, just the rhythm of live sound and the warmth of an audience that came to listen, rather than judge. These experiences grounded him, reminding him that art, in its purest form, was never about fame, but about connection. Crowe also turned his focus toward projects that reflected maturity and depth. His portrayal of Roger Ailes in The Loudest Voice in 2019 marked a deliberate return to complex storytelling. The performance earned critical praise, not for spectacle but for restraint. It showed an artist who had evolved, who understood that power did not always need to be shouted to be felt. The project was a reminder that Crowe's craft had not disappeared. It had simply matured, shaped by years of reflection and a clearer sense of purpose. Family remained his foundation. He often spoke about his children with gratitude, acknowledging that fatherhood had reshaped his priorities. Life on his property in New South Wales offered a rhythm far removed from film sets. Crowe found contentment in tending to the land, spending time with animals, and enjoying the company of close friends. Those who visited described an atmosphere of peace, a contrast to the intensity of his earlier years. The stillness he once feared had become the sanctuary he needed. He also used his platform to support charitable causes in Australia, particularly following the devastating bushfires of 2019. His donations and advocacy helped direct attention toward environmental recovery and community rebuilding. These acts were not for publicity but for purpose. They reflected a man who had come to understand that his influence could serve something greater than himself. The sharp edges that once defined his public image gave way to quiet strength. He no longer chased perfection or approval. Instead, he sought meaning in the work he chose and the life he built. Each film, each song, and each act of generosity became part of a larger picture, one that spoke of endurance, growth, and grace. Russell Crowe's story during this time became one of inward discovery. The man who had once commanded the world's attention had learned the value of stepping back. His reflection was not nostalgia, but acceptance. The knowledge that greatness does not vanish when the lights fade. It endures in the choices made away from the stage, in the peace found beyond the applause. Redemption did not arrive for Russell Crowe in a single moment. It came quietly, through time, through patience, and through an acceptance of self. The world that once defined him by headlines and awards now recognized him for resilience and authenticity. What had once been seen as retreat was revealed to be rebirth. Crowe had not vanished. He had evolved. His life had shifted from performance to purpose, from noise to meaning, from fame to fulfillment. His return to film in the years following 2019 reflected that transformation. Projects such as Unhinged in 2020 and The Pope's Exorcist in 2023 demonstrated a creative resurgence guided by choice rather than necessity. These films reminded audiences of the force that had always lived within him, the ability to command emotion and depth with ease. Yet this time the performances felt different. They carried the weight of experience, the calm of perspective, and the humility of a man who no longer sought validation from the world. In interviews, Crowe spoke with newfound clarity. He shared that life away from the spotlight had given him a better understanding of balance, that the quiet years were not lost time, but preparation for the artist he had become. He expressed gratitude rather than regret, recognizing that every struggle, every silence, and every setback had shaped his strength. Fans who once wondered why he stepped away now saw that the pause had purpose. His reemergence was not a comeback. It was continuation, the next act of a story still unfolding. Crowe's public image also softened. The intensity that once intimidated now inspired. Younger actors sought his guidance, and he offered mentorship with generosity. He spoke openly about aging, about the changing nature of art, and about embracing imperfection. These reflections resonated deeply with audiences who had grown up watching him. The man who had once embodied cinematic heroes now embodied human truth, that real power comes from understanding, not dominance. Beyond film, Crowe continued to honor his musical roots, performing in intimate venues across Australia and New Zealand. His concerts carried warmth and humor, a sense of connection that transcended celebrity. Those who attended often described the performances as personal, filled with stories, laughter, and sincerity. It was art returned to its essence, shared experience rather than spectacle. In these moments he appeared most at peace, a man reconciled with both his gifts and his past. Crowe also used his platform to uplift others. His contributions to environmental causes, community projects, and the rebuilding of areas affected by natural disasters reflected a broader sense of responsibility. He had once been known for commanding attention, now he was known for directing it toward what mattered. The journey that began with ambition had matured into one defined by compassion. Russell Crowe's journey was never about chasing fame or rebuilding what had been lost. It became a path toward balance, where the man behind the performances learned to live without the weight of expectation. After years of turbulence and public misunderstanding, he arrived at a quiet understanding of himself. The noise that once surrounded him had faded, replaced by a calm certainty that truth needs no audience. His life became a reflection of endurance, proof that stepping back does not erase greatness, and that the deepest kind of strength often emerges in moments of stillness. As the years move forward, Crowe remains a figure of both inspiration and reflection. His path shows that reinvention is not denial of the past, but an embrace of growth. Through art, through humility, through resilience, Russell Crowe found his way back, not to the noise of fame, but to the peace of self. In the end, Russell Crowe's story is not one of disappearance, but of rediscovery. The man who once stood at the center of Hollywood's brightest light chose to walk a quieter road, not out of defeat, but out of wisdom. He learned that the measure of a life is not found in headlines or trophies, but in peace, purpose, and authenticity. The years away from the spotlight became the years that defined him most, not for what the world saw, but for what he finally saw in himself. Today, his presence carries a gentler power. The artist remains, but the man has deepened. Through music, film, and acts of kindness, Russell Crowe continues to shape a legacy rooted not in fame but in truth. His journey reminds us that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, yet it is in the quiet after the storm where one's real voice is found. For more emotional stories, check out this video.